Visit us at Eduvvo. Thank you for calling Eduvvo.
So for this first map, I'm going to need you to click File, New Level, and I want you to create an empty level. With an empty level, what we're essentially going to be doing is carving out geometry at the very beginning that's going to represent kind of a clean slate for our map. So initially what we're going to be doing is laying out the floors, laying out the walls, and laying out the roof. For this first piece, what I'm going to be doing is carving out the floor. Now, to carve out the floor, what we're going to need to do is once again go back to our geometry tools. So place, geometry, and I want you to drop a box into the scene. Now, initially, I'm going to get this box and I'm just going to drop it down so that it's flush against the floor. Do you see that? This grid, it's now, the top of it is touching the grid. So the reason I got you to do that is that I want you to go to the geometry tool setting and we're going to start expanding this out. Now I could do it in this view and start pulling out walls and such, but the other way that I could do this is if I wanted to, I could go perspective, top, and now we're shown an orthographic viewport that lets me actually do things from a perfectly top-down view. This means I can move the box to here, for instance, oops, the center of the grid, and I could then click, and whenever I select one of these lines, it actually selects the lines that are perfectly parallel with it. So the first thing that we're going to be doing is laying out this floor. And this floor is going to be quite large. So I'm going to get something and I'm going to pull it across to be about this big. This is something that we can tinker with later on. But I'm going to pull it across so that it is 2 of these larger grid spaces across, and then going down I might do the same so that we have a square area. So if I wanted to, I could always go from from top view back to perspective. Now it's at this point that I really want to point out that whenever you're carving up a map, it's really, really important for you to have perspective. If you don't have perspective, this entire thing can be a very frustrating experience. So I'm going to click on Mesh, and I'm going to drag myself a couch into the map. Now when I've dragged in the couch, we can now see how big our room currently is. And it's pretty large. But that's okay, because we're going to be building walls around it and going from there. So to add walls, we're once again going to just drag in some boxes using the geometry tools. Going to drop this in. And I'm going to do this from the top-down view, so I'm going to click perspective and change it to top. And I'm going to size this up. So I'm going to go to my geometry editing mode. And I'm quickly just going to lay this out so that we have something very basic inside of our world. That's a good start. I'm going to go back to my place menu. Now remember, you can always hold down Alt and drag, and you can now see that I have a perfect duplicate of this wall here. I'm going to use that as a basis and hold down Alt and rotate, which allows me to size this up, which is currently going to need to be shortened a little bit. That's okay. Oops. So I'm going to go back to my perspective, and I can see that we have the beginnings of my walls here. Once again, I'm going to Alt drag and just pop this over here. Now the first obvious issue with what we have is that if these were walls to a room, they're not exactly, the right height. So the question is how tall should we make something like this? So this is where, again, a point of reference really comes in handy. I'm going to drag in this doorway and put it here. So this doorway I know is perfectly sized and it is the correct height for a standard doorway. So I'm going to modify my walls to be taller to kind of match that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select by holding down Control and clicking on just each of these blocks. And I'm going to go to my geometry editing mode, at which point I'm going to select all of the faces and I'm just going to drag them up a little bit. whichever face that you select last is the one that the widget will stay on. So I'm going to actually select this one last. And if I was to drag this up, we would now be presented with a room that was around this size, which I'm reasonably comfortable with, actually. We could potentially go higher and go for a really high ceiling and then cut down wherever we want to, but this is probably okay for the time being. So with that in mind, we're now going to start kind of playing with our space a little bit and getting a general idea of what we actually want to have as a setup for our room. Now, one thing that's worth mentioning here is that instead of flicking between the views, if you'd like to, you can click this button at the very top, which will simultaneously show you the left, front, top, and perspective views. So if I click here, you can see that it's been selected from all different directions. So I'm going to stick to viewport for the time being while I kind of lay out the fundamentals of my room, and then we're going to go backwards from there. The other thing that's I'm just going to leave out is I'm not going to touch the roof for the time being because I'm probably going to try and carve something interesting into that. Now for this initial area, what we're essentially going to do is create a reasonably small room. And I'm going to have a couch that's going to be sitting here. Other way around. And I'm going to make this like a standard family room. So I'm going to alt click. And I'm going to have another couch that's sitting over here. Oh, that's probably good enough. I'm going to drag in a couple of other 3D objects. So again, I'm going to drag in my coffee table. And these are all going to get relocated later, but this is going to be my initial grounding for the space. I'd really like to have this door kind of pulled over here so that I had to kind of walk past these things as they went. And I'm probably going to make this area significantly smaller. So I'm going to get the door, and I'm going to put another door probably around here. So this means we're going to end up with a space around this size. Since I've got the couches in there, it'd be nice if we added a chair. So I'm going to drag that in, spacebar. I'm just going to rotate it into somewhere that looks vaguely nice. Again, we'll be fixing this later. And because we've got the couches and the chair here, I'm going to set myself up to eventually have some sort of television here. Now, to drag in the TV, I'm going to drag it in. Again, I'm going to rotate it. I'm going to pull it back. Now, for obvious reasons, this isn't really the best way for us to have set up this space, but that's okay. Whenever you're doing these things, you're going to make 1,000,001 adjustments, because as you start carving it out, you're going to get a better idea of what you need to do. So in this situation, I've got a door here, couch, chair, tabletop, TV. Now, if you want to follow along, I'm going to switch to top. I'm going to zoom in. And I'm just going to leave this on screen for a second so you can copy this into your own if you choose to. Now, from here on in, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start relocating these things so that they're in a slightly more comfortable sizing. The first thing that I can see I'm going to need to do is clearly bring in all of my walls because I was totally overeager when I anticipated how big I actually wanted to make this room. So I'm going to go to place mode. I'm going to drag select all of those objects, but not the TV. And I'm going to pull them in to about here. Now, if I was to go back to my perspective mode, I can now see that this is a little bit closer to what we want, although I may have been a little bit overeager. Pull it back 1 meter more. That feels nice. Yeah, we'll go with that. So this is going to be my initial area. I'm now going to get this, and I'm going to pull this wall in to here. I'm going to get this. I'm going to pull it in to here. And while I'm at it, I'm just going to quickly resize a lot of these things. Again, I'm just selecting the necessary faces in geometry mode. Oops. Now, if we wanted to do more rooms, we could always go ahead and actually, keep the floor the size it is. But I know I'm probably going to be leaving it like this for the most part. So for the time being, I'm going to shrink this down to the smallest size it needs to be, just to make my life a little bit easier. So now we have the basics of our room. We're going to plan out some other things now as well. So I really want to have some sort of light kind of coming in through here, and that's going to be like a nice sunlight or evening light coming in from over there. The other thing that I'm going to do is we may crack open this door so that we have ourselves a hallway going on. I know I'm going to have some lamps around the place and some other things, but I'm going to keep this reasonably clean and reasonably simple. So it's at this point that I'm going to take myself out of the unlit mode. Problem is I have no lights. So I'm going to go to my place menu, and I'm going to click on lights. And I'm going to drag these into the scene. Now, these are what I call work lights. What I've dragged in was a point light, but I'm not really going to bother setting them up. I'm putting them in more so I can get kind of a feel of the space itself and have a general idea of how things are laid out. So I'm going to alt-drag a couple of work lights around the space until they, correctly illuminate everything. Also, one useful tip is whenever you're working like this, I often tap G to see how it looks as if it was in the game. So it gets rid of all of the editor-looking elements on this. So G to tap into game mode, G to tap off. You can also do it through here, game view. So we've got the beginnings of our space, and it's at this point that I'm going to start making things kind of a little bit more interesting. I think the first protocol is really going to be making sure that we have some nice lighting going on from outside this doorway. So I'm going to drag this sliding doors asset over to here. And this is going to eventually end up being where my sun's shining through. Now, the obvious issue that we're going to have if we do this is that, well, I have a wall in the way of my sun. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drag in under geometry, I'm going to drag in a box, and I'm going to set this to be a subtractive box. You can now see that this carves the whole way through our wall. So the first thing that I'm going to need to do is look at this and kind of shrink down the subtraction brush to be the correct size of this doorway. So I'm going to click here and I'm going to go to my set position, my snap size, and I'm going to drop it to a 5 centimeter snap. I'm then going to go to my geometry tool and click here, and I'm now going to bring this all the way back so that it's very, very thin. Now it's hard to see, but I think that will line up. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select each edge of the subtraction brush. Again, if you can't see it, you can always go to wireframe mode and select the correct brush. And I'm just going to pull these out so that they kind of meet where the door ends are, just like the top. So for anyone, again, that's forgetting, it's Alt-2 to go to wireframe mode. Which point I'm going to go back into lit mode. We can now see that that's carved in and running reasonably well flush against the edge of this. We'll have a better idea in just a moment. So the next thing I'm going to do is kind of carve out how this open area looks. Obviously this wall is massive. No one actually has a wall this big. So I'm going to get this wall and I'm going to pull it in as well. So I'm going to go to a 10 centimeter snap grid and I'm going to bring it to about there. So that's reasonably thin. You can see if I go into unlit mode that that's how thin my wall is. Now that my wall's resized, I'm going to pull out and relocate this doorway so that it's just inside of the edges here. So I'm going to go to a 5 centimeter snap grid, and I can see that it's currently doing that. I'm just going to move it over so that it's now sitting inside the wall correctly. The other thing that I've gone ahead and I'm going to do is I'm going to select my subtraction brush, and I can see that there's a slight issue whereby the brush is currently not reaching the end. I thought it did, but it's not. And I'm doing that on both sides because, hey, if I'm going to make a mistake, I might as well make it twice, right? So I'm going to go to wireframe mode, and it looked like it was just 5 centimeters across. Would probably do the trick. So I'm going to do that on both. I went 10. You can now see that's ending inside of the door. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go here. I'm going to select the back face of my subtraction brush. Again, it's a little bit occluded by this static mesh, so I'm just going to get rid of the static mesh for the time being with the H key. And I'm just going to resize this to be the size of the doorway. So we've now got ourselves a nice little doorway. And I'm actually going to go ahead and I'm going to drop in a temporary directional light that's going to act as just my sun, so I know how this is going to start looking. So I'm going to go back to my place menu, lights, and I'm going to drop in a directional light actor. Hit spacebar, and you'll see that wherever I rotate this to, it's going to kind of have the sun coming in from that direction. And I think this would look best if we had like the doorway kind of casting some cool shadows going straight across the room. So it's at this point that I am going to go ahead and create a roof so I can get a better idea of how this is going to be looking. I'm going to set my snap grid to 100. I'm going to alt drag upwards. And you'll see that that's nicely snapped to the roof because we stayed on the grid. And we've got this going on, which looks okay. Thinking I'm going to go to a 50 centimeter snap grid and move this across as well, actually. Just give them a little bit more space as they kind of come in that door. Cool. So, with that in mind, let's start looking at what we can do to kind of make this room a little bit more interesting.
If you are looking for teaching stuff, education stuff, programming series, application, and Android development, coding skills, marketing skills, presentation skill, paid courses for free are available. Thank you for calling Eduvvo.